Thumbs up. Buzzing. I must be standing too closely to something. Okay, my name is Julia Lee. I'm the librarian here at the Washington County campus. Welcome tonight. We're very excited to have Dr. Ruslana Westerlund with us. Before I introduce her, I just want to make a couple announcements. We have a couple weeks off, but our very last event in the Ukrainian series is going to be a performance by the Dnipro Dance Ensemble from Milwaukee. So it's going to be an evening of Ukrainian dance and culture. That's going to be November 8th at 7:30.
Yeah.
So it's going to be 1 hour later because they said we needed more time to get from Milwaukee to West Bend before and get ready to perform. So that'll be November 8th at 7:30, and that will be in the theater. So it's not going to be in this room. We're going to be back down in the theater for that one. Hope you can join us. It's going to be wonderful. I'm very excited for that performance. If you just haven't gotten enough lectures and you need more food for your brain, we do have our Scholar Sip lecture series starting tomorrow in the library. We have Dr. Ann Widmeyer talking about coffee, tea, and women's anger in 18th century Britain. And I'm pretty excited about that one. It's going to be really interesting. I mean, they're just all really interesting topics, casual conversation, and this is what gets the students there, free pizza. We have free pizza lunch, so it starts at 11:50 in the library tomorrow, and there's 2 other speakers in our fall series, so please come and check those out. They're free, open to everybody, and it's a really great time. So those are my announcements. Without further ado, I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Ruslana Westerlund. She is a Ukrainian-born educational consultant, writer, researcher, and public speaker. She is an active volunteer in the local Ukrainian community in Dane County, as well as a volunteer in a transcontinental partnership with Australian researchers to support Ukrainian teachers in Ukraine.
Yes.
Her volunteer work and her entire professional life have focused on helping immigrant children, youth, and adults to integrate successfully into the new places they gradually start calling their homes. In her talk today, she will focus on her journey as a transcultural person and what it means to belong to a new place. So please help me welcome Dr. Ruslana Westerlund.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, just want to make sure my sound is on. You can hear me in the back? Great. Wonderful. Well, I'm truly, truly honored to be here today. I prepared a talk. I've thought about this talk for many, many weeks. I think Julia contacted me back in May. Yeah. And I'm like, wow, these guys plan ahead. And I'm like, okay, I'll be there. And what coincidentally was wonderful is that, I live in Cross Plains, which is west of Madison, about 2 towns west. If you know the largest shoebox place, I live about 10 minutes away from that. So that's far. And I was thinking, how is it that I'm going to drive to West Bend, present a lecture, be done by like 7:30 or 8, depends how long the conversations linger, and then make it home on time the same day? So the coincidence worked out in my favor because I'm presenting and attending a conference which is taking place in Milwaukee today, tomorrow, and Friday. And so I drove from Milwaukee. That was some interesting traffic from 5 p.m. between 5. I left at 5, and I thought I gave myself plenty of time, and it took me exactly 58 minutes to get here. So I'm fortunate I didn't have to drive 2.5 hours or however long it takes to get from Cross Plains to West Bend. And I'm really honored and privileged to share my story with you today. The way I'm going to be doing the talk is I prepared a lecture, and the lecture is sprinkled with my reading from the book. I will be reading a lot because it captures a lot of what I wanted to say in this topic on translation of self and becoming a transcultural person. So without further ado, I'll just jump right into it. I was born and raised and educated in Ukraine in the last 2 decades of communism. My childhood was in the 70s. My schooling was in the 80s. And my college life, the 90s, was split in half. The first half was in post-Soviet Ukraine, and the second half was a complete fog caused by the culture shock of immigrating to the United States as a young 22-year-old in 1995. Back then, I didn't have words for culture shock. I just remember feeling completely out of place and moved not just from, even I couldn't even recognize the maps that were on the walls. Like the center of my place completely was displaced. I was feeling completely transplanted. Like when you plant a garden and you move a plant from one area to another, the plant goes through a transplant shock. After withering for a while and adjusting to the new soil, the plant begins to take root, absorb the nutrients from the soil, make friends with the new plants around her, and then begins to thrive. So I prefer to call transplant shock as opposed to a culture shock. When I first arrived, Americans were asking me, "Do you have culture shock? Are you culture shocked?" Like, you know, the shock from the electricity. Are you jet lagged? How can you recognize that you're in a culture shock when you're in the middle of it? What's worse is when I myself, this is really bad, recently met newly arrived Ukrainians and asked them if they're experiencing culture shock. And their reply was a confused look. I'm like, gosh, I remember myself doing the same thing as that face. And in that moment, I realized that I'm doing to them the same thing people did to me when I first arrived. So in this talk, I'll talk about the transplant shock, the culture shock, and the process of adapting to the new environment, which can describe as negotiation of self or translation of self, and finding ways to belong, take root, and thrive. I do love gardening analogy. I'm a gardener. And I'm into microbiology of fermentation, so we can talk about that after. Sourdough, kombucha, and fermented tomatoes. Fermented tomatoes are straight from Ukraine. You have to Google it. It's a thing. They're not canned. They're not canned. There is no vinegar in them. It's all lactobacilli. The topic of my talk is about translation of self. And I'm using this term, I'm borrowing it from Eva Hoffman, who used that term and that way of describing her adjustment in her memoir, Lost in Translation, My Life in a New Language. Her writing resonated with me deeply because when I was writing mine, I was looking for a mentor text. And there are many memoirs out there, and they all have different themes or different ways or frameworks of really describing the self through that framework. And not all of them fit, but Eva Hoffman's framework of being lost in translation, rediscovering yourself, reestablishing yourself without losing yourself and your identity, the original self, that really resonated. And it resonated deeply because of the introspection that's involved and the negotiation of self as a transcultural being. She talked about her process of learning how to belong in a new place or in multiple places at once and remain true to the original ethnic self. And that negotiation involves deep self-reflection and deep knowledge of your own culture, of trying to see your own culture from the outside in. And self-examination and getting really meta about things. You really have to go up above to really see something. So right now I'm going to read from my book about this process. It's from the prologue. It is the summer of 2008, the year the movie WALL-E is released. My boys, Nikki and Julian, are ages 6 and 3. We're huddled in our basement in front of the TV, snuggling together under the blankets. I watch this movie through the eyes of a mother and an immigrant, comparing the moving images I see on the screen with the still memories of my own life. This Pixar production depicts the adventures of a good-hearted robot who is rocketed onto a journey where he encounters a culture unlike his own. I watch it and see parallels between WALL-E's adventure and my own. WALL-E passes his days alone on Earth, collecting trinkets and treasures from amongst the heaps of garbage covering the planet. There is a scene in which WALL-E holds up a spork. and he can't figure out which collection of utensils to add it to. Is it a fork or is it a spoon? Is it a fork or is it a spoon? And he literally moves it back and forth, and it doesn't fit into either category. It's neither, and it's both. As a bicultural person who was raised in Ukraine but lived most of my adult life in the US, I feel like a sport most of the time. A little bit Ukrainian, a little bit American, and a whole lot of in between. I've lived in the US since 1995, but most Americans still view me as a foreigner, which is a natural thing to do because I'm literally not from here. It happens when people ask me questions about where my name is from or what the origin of my accent is. When I order my coffee at a local coffee shop, I just want to get on with my day, I get, where are you from? I want to say I'm from Minnesota. And they don't mean that. They mean, where are you from? And I say, I'm from Ukraine. And they ask, do you know so-and-so from the Ural Mountains? Or, it must be so cold because it's close to Siberia. And I want to say, and sometimes I do when I'm in a feisty mood, well, Siberia is actually closer to the US than Ukraine. They assume that Ukraine is part of Russia, something Ukrainians have been fighting against since Moscow appeared out of a swamp in the 13th century. When I visit, it's true, you look it up. When I return to visit my family in Ukraine, I don't always feel like I fit in there either. There is this thing about greeting people only once a day and not every time you see them. So I remember calling my aunt and saying hello to her again, and she said, we already saw each other this morning, why are you greeting me again? So that was like, oh, I forgot how they do it here, and I'm here, and I am from here, or where am I from? In some aspects, I feel like I'm a foreigner in my own land. I forget my own language, and when I speak, it comes out as if it's translated from English. My nephew Igor says, Ru, that's my nickname, your Ukrainian is high intermediate. Thanks for the laugh. While this may make me feel as if I'm stuck between two cultures, neither fully American, not fully Ukrainian anymore, I celebrate the advantage of being able to embrace both cultures and be truly global, the transcultural self. We don't hold up a spork and say, this is designed so poorly. No, we find it innovative, useful, flexible, adaptable, and an example of the out-of-the-box thinking. It belongs with the forks and the spoons. And yet it is in a class of its own. After decades in a new culture, I've become a new me, a spoon and a fork combination. I don't have to be only one or the other, either Ukrainian or American. I can be both. I can be a hyphenated American, just like most immigrants are. So this story is about becoming a spork and figuring out how to fit in and how to remain unique. Well, there is more fun stuff in the prologue, but I have to move on. The process of translation included many challenges. One of the biggest challenges was actually the timing of my upbringing and the timing of my leaving. I left before Ukraine as a country remembered and reclaimed who she truly was after 70+ years of the Soviet waterboarding. That's what I call it. Ukraine, the way I knew her, forgot her fierceness for independence, for the free land that was taken away in Holodomor in 1932-33 during Rozkulachenia. Have you heard of Holodomor? If you haven't, look it up. It's very easy to spell. All the vowels are O's, and then there's a bunch of consonants. H-O-L-O-D-O-M-O-R. And Holod means hunger, and morete, mor, from Latin, is to starve or die. So it's death by starvation, and it was artificially generated famine by Stalin to basically get rid of independent and free land-loving Ukrainians because they wanted to hang on to their land, and so they were called fist, kulak. So rozkulachenia means to undoing that, taking away their land, taking away their love for freedom and independence. So Ukraine, the way I knew her, forgot her fierceness for independence for the free land that was taken away in Holodomor in 1932 and 33, during which up to 6 million people were starved. She really didn't forget. I know, and many of my friends from Lviv will correct me, but when I was growing up with an identity confusion, an ethnic and linguistic inferiority complex, I attribute my confusion about who I am and what it means to live in the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic to that fact. And so when you are trying to kind of figure out who you are in a new place as an immigrant, and you don't have really clear sense of self, sense of ethnic and linguistic self, it's very hard to translate that unclear sense of identity that I had. The only explanation I have for that confusion was Ukraine not being fully confident or not fully remembering Ukraine of the Kievan Rus and the center of Europe for 7 centuries before Russia's desire to be part of us. So when I first arrived in the States and I arrived on a J1 visa as an exchange teacher, I remember American teachers asking me to teach Russian language and to display Russian matryoshka dolls. And I actually didn't oppose anyone who asked me to teach those things and do those things. And in fact, my first simple children's book that I wrote was like Russian the way kids speak it. Because I just left very recent post-Soviet Ukraine in 95, when Ukraine became independent in 91. There were 0 changes in those 4 years, because you can't change on a dime from communism and Soviet waterboarding to some flourishing, confident, and clear country with a clear identity. It's only been recent. So our Ukrainian culture, the way I experienced it from 1973 to 1995, was on the verge of being erased, because Ukrainians lived a very Soviet life full of Russian imperialism, which involved cultural, ideological, and linguistic domination and erasure, a lot of linguistic erasure. For about 300 years, the Ukrainian language was under persecution, very, very overt, directed persecution through various laws that they were passing. You can't publish your dissertations and master's theses in Ukrainian. So knowledge distribution, think about that, was done in Russian. My master's thesis was written in Russian. A lot of my classes were conducted in Russian. Ukrainian language was always relegated to some lower status. When I played with my dolls, the cool doll spoke Russian, and the not cool doll or something was Ukrainian. And then when we would go to the city, we had to switch to Russian because nobody would take you seriously if you spoke Ukrainian. This was happening in the country where Ukrainian was the official language. So the language was minoritized, and the people's sense of who they were as Ukrainians was very non-existent. It was very Soviet influenced by that. I don't remember us waving blue and yellow Ukrainian flags and wearing vyshyvankas, embroidered shirts, in the streets to show our ethnic pride. Because embroidered shirts is not just something you do when you're bored. Embroidery is actually the sense of Ukrainian identity, cultural identity. And there are embroidered colors and patterns specific to each region of the country. And we have 27 regions. So it's when people want to show off their ethnic pride, they put on a shirt. Children, women, men, grandma, grandpas, anyone. They exist in all shapes and sizes and colors and full-on dresses. It's a gorgeously beautiful sight, which I hadn't experienced when I lived there. I didn't see any of it. Yes. I also don't remember singing the Ukrainian anthem. Think about the fact, not knowing words to your own anthem. What does that do to you? So, in fact, when I arrived in the US, all I remembered was the Soviet anthem. I actually translated it here in the book. It's awful. It's full of imperialism, and it's just propaganda in every line of text. In fact, I learned the Ukrainian anthem here in the United States after the Maidan Revolution. That one, remember? For 93 days, Ukrainians protested peacefully in the center of Kyiv. And you know how Ukrainians protest? It started on November 21st, and it ended on February 16th or 21st. So basically, wintertime in Ukraine, wintertime, similar to Wisconsin. And so Ukrainians didn't go home when they went home when they ousted Yanukovych, the Russian puppet. So when we protest until we get our way, not until we get cold. I learned the Ukrainian anthem with the other diasporic Ukrainians who left when Ukraine was still Soviet. And we found ourselves unlearning how to be Soviet and relearning what it means to be Ukrainian. I remember sitting in the Bethel University office. I was teaching a class they let me design because there is this notion as J-term, which is basically a term between the fall and the spring semester. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to design a course on Ukrainian language and culture. And I remember reading a book by, I forgot her name, I should have written down in my speech. She wrote a book about the Ukrainian history, and I started reading it to select a text for the course. And I just broke down in tears in my office, realizing that I didn't know my own history, the history of my people in my land. Because all we studied was some Russian version of everything. And in fact, we were so brainwashed that I thought Russia appeared first in history, but it didn't. Ukraine appeared 300 or 400 years before Russia, and we were also brainwashed that Russia was better and bigger and more wonderful. And so imagine living with that as a 20-year-old and reading a book about your history for the very first time in your, when I was 22 or 23. We found ourselves unlearning how to be Soviet and relearning what it means to be Ukrainian. That caused a lot of cognitive and emotional dissonance, resulting in much needed clarity about who we are as ethnic beings. I never owned a Ukrainian flag until Putler, that's my name for him, there is no other word, invaded Ukraine, and he doesn't deserve a capital P, by the way. And if you read Ukrainians write about him, Russia doesn't deserve a capital letter, and Putin doesn't deserve a capital letter. Seriously, we're like so adamant about it. And of course, every autocorrect corrects it for us. I'm like, no, you're wrong, I'm right. I never owned a Ukrainian flag until Putler invaded Ukraine in 2014 to bring peacekeepers and to free Russian ethnics from the Ukrainian Nazis. That's the rhetoric. Even today on Instagram, I was reading, and he's saying, we are going to overcome these attacks that the Ukrainians are making. I'm like, it's George Orwell in every sense of the word. So in some sick and weird way, I owed it to Putler for reminding me of my roots and for making me learn the Ukrainian anthem and for making me be proud of who I am and for having Ukrainian flag hanging outside my house in Cross Plains and for causing me to remember all of my Ukrainian language. All of my Ukrainian words came back, every single one. So my process of learning how to belong in the United States has become inextricably interwoven with the process of rediscovering my own identity as a Ukrainian and separating myself from all the Soviet residue that settled and seeped into my psyche. I'm going to read more from my book. That's page 186. Now in America, I lose my language all over again. The first years of my life, I was losing it to Russian. This time, I'm losing Ukrainian to English. I don't have Ukrainian words for identity or linguistic insecurity or bilingualism. I only have those words in English. I find that I speak to myself in English. I don't have Ukrainian words when I read books of my profession, like Halliday's Learning to Mean. I'm a linguist by training. When I pray for my parents, I pray in Ukrainian. It's the only time I pray in Ukrainian. When I pray for my children and my friends, I pray in English. I realize that even my prayer time in Ukrainian shrinks because I don't pray for my mom anymore. She's no longer among the living who need prayer. She has passed on. I try to extend my prayer time from my dad in Ukrainian, so I have that link to my language and my earthly tato, dad, and my loving Heavenly Father through prayer. I fear that one day my use of Ukrainian will shrink to nothing. Many days I catch myself speaking in Ukrainian when no one is around. In fact, most of the time I don't have anyone around to speak Ukrainian with. I explain later in the book the struggle of raising children bilingually. Do you remember the last time you didn't have anyone to speak in your native language with? Do you know what that hunger feels like? You turn on the TV and your language is not there. You go outside and talk to your neighbor and your language isn't there. You look for it everywhere, but it's hard to find. I find it in Skype conversations with my dad. I found it in my mother's voice when she was still living. I find it in my own thoughts, but it's very, very quiet. Or it sounds translated from English and not natural. Every once in a while, I have to meet with other Ukrainians just to get the taste back in my mouth. I'm very happy to have a family that speaks in English, and my whole profession is the study of teaching English to non-native speakers. But every once in a while, it's good to speak my mother tongue, if only to myself. As an immigrant who has been living for 2.5 decades of my adult life in the US, I'm losing touch with the more recent developments in Ukraine. I feel like I'm no longer in the inside. I can't follow the narrative. I'm not in the narrative. I cry during the brutal days of the Maidan revolution. I miss being in a community with other Ukrainians to feel and cry together. I miss out because I'm not there during the Maidan revolution of dignity. I'm not there during the resurgence of the Ukrainian identity. I'm not there to walk the streets in my vyshyvanka, the embroidered shirt, on May 16th to celebrate the national and international Vyshyvanka Day, which is day when everyone, children, men, and women, show off their Ukrainian pride by wearing an embroidered shirt. I join my Ukrainian compatriots by wearing a shirt to work, but no one else is wearing one. I realize again that I carry Ukraine inside me by myself, like many other diasporic Ukrainians who are scattered all over the world, we are Ukraine outside Ukraine. I use social media to connect with Ukrainians worldwide, to feel like I still belong, and I can somehow to contribute to the Ukrainian community. The Ukrainian spirit of dignity created by the people whose protests brought down President Yanukovych reignites my Ukrainianness inside me, and I feel it's alive again. But then the flame grows smaller, and my Americanness takes over. There is an ebb and flow to my ethnic self. During those times, it was hard to identify as Ukrainian growing up in that Soviet regime because we were taught to identify as Soviet. I remember asking my mom for cultural objects to represent my country with dignity, and we had to run around the whole country to find something that would serve well as cultural symbols to represent my country with dignity. And this is where I have to read out loud, and this is where I start crying. So thank you for the box of Kleenex. I requested it. Like, I need a podium and a box of Kleenex. So it's on page 81. Yeah. representing my whole country with dignity. Before leaving for the US, I had to pack my clothes, say my goodbyes, and gather up traditional Ukrainian artifacts to bring them to Minnesota to represent my country. Mom, do we have anything Ukrainian I can bring to America? Everything we own is Ukrainian, Mom says. But she doesn't understand. I need objects that scream American, Ukrainian culture. It's the end of August, 2 weeks before my departure to America. I look for cultural objects worthy of America. I look at our dishes. They look Ukrainian, but the stamp on the back reads Gomel Belarus, which translates as made in Belarus, because everything was made in some country or in some city. There was nothing private. It's like my dad's car was made in Zaporizhia, so the name for the car was Zaporozhets. If the tractor was made in Belarus, then it said made in Belarus. So the whole notion of private businesses, there was just none of it, and I couldn't understand it. I do have some funny stories about it coming up. I consider the sunflower oil and the bread on the kitchen table. Sunflower is made in Ukraine, about 20 miles away from my house. That's as Ukrainian as it gets. The delicious hearty rye bread is made in Bosivka, neighboring village, but it would never survive the trip. I look around and I find nothing that can be packed on a plane, carried across the Atlantic, and displayed in schools and churches where I would be representing my cultural heritage. I keep looking and I finally find a truly Ukrainian object, a ceramic figurine of a Ukrainian man and woman lovingly embracing, dressed in traditional Ukrainian costumes. Mom, can I take this? Sure, that was our wedding gift, just don't break it. Mom is proud that her wedding gift from 1968 is going to America to represent her homeland. I carefully take it out of the china cabinet where all the dishes are displayed. It's the only object we own that represents Ukraine in traditional ways. And as I think about making presentations to Americans about Ukrainian culture, which I'm doing right now, I realize that one figurine of a man and a woman embracing is not enough to speak for our culture. Plus, I'm not sure how fifth graders are going to react to the embrace. I can hear them giggle already. I realize I need to bring more artifacts. Carol, my host mom, mentioned that traditional clothing will be great to showcase. My dad runs around town asking the workers in the Palace of Culture if they can spare one costume. The Palace of Culture, by the way, is our name for a community center. We're quite ostentatious with our names. Why name something a community center when it can be a palace, and not just any palace, a Palace of Culture? But to name it a community center would be a misnomer. Okay, I'm going to skip this. So Dad and I think maybe, just maybe, we can find Ukrainian culture in the Palace of Culture. My dad takes me with him so I can try on the costume to make sure it fits. It's an embroidered shirt with a skirt. Because I have to wear this to various schools and churches to represent my country with dignity. I'm a skinny 21-year-old. This was 20 pounds ago. 50, oh my gosh, I'm 50 pounds ago, I'm a liar. So the Palace of Culture workers make sure to give me the costume with the smallest size. She understands that a piece of buzhenka is going all the way to America. It's an embroidered shirt with a wraparound skirt. The sleeves are so puffy, I lose my arms in them. My fingers peek out of the cuffs. The skirt is so long, it drags on the ground. The traditional Ukrainian ensemble features bright red knee-high boots with a 2-inch heel, but they're too worn, she says. With a content grin on my face, I take the clothes with me, thinking now that I have a traditional embroidered costume to bring to America in addition to the figurine. One more thing. We go to different shops, so my dad and I keep looking for more. We go to different shops and we see the objets d'art too expensive for us. We end up buying 2 lacquered wooden plates with the hand-painted Petrivka floral design. The more intricate the design, the more expensive the plate. I do have a copy of it here. It's not the one that I brought, but it's actually a recent gift that I received for my support of the Ukrainian teachers during the war. But here's the important part about this. The more intricate the design, the more expensive the plate. I'm looking at some plates with exquisite designs of a boy and a girl playing Ukrainian instruments in the countryside. The girl is playing the bandura and the boy is playing flute. I imagine proudly sharing with my future American audiences all about the bandura, that it has 55 strings and is more complicated than the guitar. I'm already rehearsing my future presentations. My dad tells me we don't have enough money for the plate with the bandura. I dream about bringing a real bandura. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Dad says we can only afford plates with a simple floral pattern. We buy 2, wrap them in brown paper, and leave. On my way home, I envision standing in front of hundreds of Americans, decked out in my costume, with my parents' wedding gift and the 2 plates spread out on the rushniki, the embroidered runner. And I worry about whether there is enough dignity in these artifacts for my cultural presentations. I know I should have gotten those red boots and begged the Cherkasy Palace of Culture for the bandura with 55 strings. It's September 4th, 1995. I bid a tearful goodbye to my parents. I get on a plane for the first time in my life to fly to the US. I'm 21 years old. I leave my mom, my dad, my brother Bogdan, my sister, my grandma, my cousins, my aunts and uncles, and my potato fields. And if you read my book, you know the importance of those. I'm leaving my river, my hills by the river, Skosohore, my road that leads me. At least I'm predictable. I cry always at the same places. My road that leads me to my grandma's house, the stork nest, and the school building that my dad built. I know in my heart that I'm leaving forever. Not just for a year, as my visa says. I know that I'm not returning to the potato fields. But at the same time, I have no clue what emigrating means. I don't know the consequences are until much, much later. I'm just leaving because the economy of my country is on the brink of collapse, and I'm young, and I need a future. I'm leaving to build my own future and the future of my children. I fly through Ireland, where we stop to refuel. I am on my own, wearing my Chanel coat that my parents bought for me with the money from the butchered pig. At some point, I need to read that story. I have $20 American on me, money left over from the bribe money that Carol gave me. I buy my first cappuccino and a book in English. The process of translation of self involved a lot of comparisons and realizations, and they weren't purely linguistic, because language and culture are bound together. Language represents the cultural aspects. I grew up in a village where we had a collective farm and a sugar beet factory. And there was a school that my dad built. Americans were fascinated with the sugar beet factory when I was telling them about my village. Americans would ask me, where did the sugar beets come from to be processed in the sugar beet factory? To which I responded very matter-of-factly, like, come on, guys. They come from the collective farm, of course. I still remember their look. I didn't know why they looked at me that way. I'm mostly used to that curious look when people hear me talk and all they do with their faces to figure out my accent. And they actually can't hear what I'm saying. It happens often. Which is followed by, are you from Russia? Awful question. Just ask, are you from Ukraine? And you're going to be better off with most people. But this was different. because people were struggling to wrap their heads around the content of what I was saying, not just my accent. Their facial reactions caused me to reflect on my use of English, on those truly English words, collective and farm. I didn't realize back then that those concepts didn't exist in the US. The words existed with their individual meanings, but not concept of a collective farm as a whole. Then they would follow up saying, did you have a business that sold those beets to the farm? And I then gave them the confused look. I'm like, I just said collective farm. Like, which part you don't understand? I didn't have a concept of a private business. In my childhood, the way I heard my parents talk about it, business was a dirty word, used to talk about someone doing something illegally in the rotten capitalism or something like that, or to make money because the government communist paycheck didn't pay well enough. So many people were paid with the product they sold, like tires and one guy was writing a story on Facebook where his parents were paid with lids for canning. Yeah, but the lids for canning couldn't pay the surgeon for his sister to have surgery. It just was awful. I was really happy because my mom worked in a clothing store, and I really liked when she was paid with Japanese down jackets, light as a feather, literally, and Italian leather shoes. As I continued to live my life in the United States, Americans asked me lots of questions because they were curious. Most questions actually made it into this book, and one of those questions, well, how did you survive the Soviet Union? And now I'm going to read again. And this is the Soviet stories you guys were asking for when I was communicating with Julia before the event. So I'm going to read about Oktyabrёнок, page 31. Actually, it starts on 30. Yeah, right here. Okay. I was born in 1973, the year now. I often write in present tense, so this is that case. The year now is 1982, so right here with me. These are the Brezhnev years. I'm in second grade when Brezhnev dies. And it's lunchtime in school. I remember it vividly. At least once a week, we are served mashed potatoes and herring. And today is the mashed potatoes and herring kind of day. Sorry to make you drool. The teachers make an announcement about his death and tell us, start crying for the loss of our great leader, Comrade Brezhnev. I know that wailing clears the passage into the afterlife for the dead, so I join others because I know Comrade Brezhnev could use all the help he can get. Crocodile tears run down my cheeks into the slimy gray herring and the bluish mashed potatoes, diluting the already watery mound of mush. The world around me mourns the death of the General Secretary on this sad day in Soviet history. I'll always remember this day, similar to how you guys remember when Kennedy was shot. The loss is so profound, you remember where you were and what you were doing. I actually remember the place where I was sitting in the lunchroom. Soviet, and this is, wow, 82, that's like what, 30 years ago? 40? Oh my gosh, I'm old. The loss is so profound, you remember where you were and what you were doing. Soviet leaders were black in public. The state declares a 5-day mourning period, and we aren't allowed to laugh and be happy. The TV stations preempt all Transcultural, previously scheduled programming of major shows. I can't watch my favorite cartoons. That was awful. Called animated show called Nu Pagadi, which is like translated as "Watch Out." Basically, it's our version of Tom and Jerry. Yeah, it's the wolf chasing the rabbit. We're not allowed to watch my other favorite animal cartoon, Crocodile Gena and Cheburashka. We are to grieve the passing of our leader, the General Secretary. We don't even call our leaders presidents because that's an American word, and we don't emulate the evil empire. We use the term that basically means a glorified secretary. I hear a teacher reprimanding us for exhibiting happiness. Не можна посміхатися. It's not permitted to smile. She scolds us. All I remember about Brezhnev are his eyebrows and that he was overweight and moved slowly, and the very slow wave he gave from the podium during the Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, literally like this. The congresses are held every 5 years for all the Soviet leaders together in Moscow and to remind each other why communism is worth pursuing, even as they know that it can't sustain itself. We watch these Soviet congresses on TV as a family, almost like how American families gather to watch the Super Bowl, to see communism glorified and tanks rolled out on the streets of Moscow, but we don't have any Doritos, nachos, or pizza. Instead, there is vodka, pickles, sausage, and pickle juice as a cure for the hangover the next day. I am an Oktyabryonak, which means, okay, I'll just read, okay. I'm a member of a youth organization. Oktyabryonak means October child, because October was the month of the Russian Revolution in 1917, which we celebrated every single year in October, and it was a big holiday. So we became the children of the revolution, charged with carrying the proletariat ideas forward. Children in the United States have organizations to join, like Brownies and Webelos. I think that's how you pronounce that. I don't know what that means. And then they carry, my husband gave me that word. And then they work their way to the Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts, and then end up on the Democratic or Republican parties, right? Well, we have the same thing, but instead of learning how to sell cookies or build a fire in the rain, we learn how to be good communists. Becoming an Oktyabryonak is the first step in the promotion toward Communist Party membership. This step is for children in elementary school. I have to wear a special pin with Lenin's face engraved on it. Heaven forbid you forget to wear the pin on your uniform. You had to go back home and put it on and then go to school. I'm trying to see how much time I have to read everything, because there is more, and you can buy my book at the end. There we go. Okay, so then we are promoted to young pioneers. But what I want to, and then the doctrinate brainwashing starts when we first learn how to read. My first reader starts with a portrait of Lenin and a short poem to inspire us to be like him. And that's kindergarten first reader. The content of the book is all propaganda, how great the Soviet Union is, how great Lenin is, and how great our communist future will be. There is actually a little picture of this book, and the translation is, everything starts in life with a small thing. From the kernel starts bread, and from a small ray of light comes a star. And even Lenin started his difficult life with the first reader. So be like Lenin, basically. So, and then there is my German classes, propaganda through the foreign language classes, and the translation of the Soviet Union anthem. But I have to read to you about AK-47. Oh, this is the stuff you came here for, I know. In 1988, the Space Shuttle Challenger explodes on liftoff. Halley's Comet pays the Earth a visit. Chernobyl blows up its top. American audiences flock to see Top Gun, and I'm training to fire automatic weapons. I'm in 8th grade. As a child who lives through the last decades of communism, my public education includes learning how to disassemble, clean, and reassemble an AK-47 blindfolded. I did it. Now, as I write this, I still have some muscle memory for how it is done, how to properly seat the magazine into the receiver extension assembly, and how to thread the carrier spring through the hole at the top of the barrel. Girls are included in this training instead of being sent off to home economics class to learn how to sew kitchen aprons. I'm quite handy with the Kalashnikov. This is mandatory training, part of our civics class. Back in the day when Americans had civic classes, they had to learn how to say the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, sing the national anthem, and how to be good citizens. In the USSR, we learned how to shoot AK-47s and pull on and off our gas masks and run around the school in them. I hated that. Oh, here, I actually wrote about that. I absolutely hate doing this because the masks have to be airtight to work properly, and I can't get it over my head. I have a fear of suffocating when I'm trying to pull that thick, stinky, dirty rubber mask over my head. During this exercise, I wouldn't mind going to home ec and just sew some aprons. But we didn't have that option. We have to make sure we're ready in case of an impending airstrike from the Americans. Our civics teacher, who is a former military officer, makes us march around the school in gas masks. Being forced to march in these hot masks through which I can barely see or breathe is torture. As a reprieve from this misery, we're then allowed to go shoot automatic weapons at the shooting range 20 meters away from the track where 5th graders are running laps during gym class. Nobody was killed. There is also a playground and a school garden next to the range. But the bullets supposedly aren't a threat to anyone because the shooting range is in a deep ravine. So there. In the US, you have to drive out into the country to find a shooting range. But in the USSR, shooting machine guns is all part of fun and games. As elementary school children, we fear for our lives when our teachers show us pictures of big mushroom clouds from an atomic bomb, and we worry that Americans might push the button at any minute. We practice putting on masks made out of cheesecloth and elastic straps, hide under our desk. As a 2nd grader, I'm not very good at fitting the mask on and feel terrible that I might die because of my inability to navigate those straps. How do our teachers possibly think that a flimsy cheesecloth mask is going to save you from radioactive dust? We didn't rehearse for a nuclear attack with gas masks until high school. So I want to actually end a little bit with kind of an important message here, and it's a little bit more academic in nature, but the message is critical of how we view immigrants and migrants and people who are different from us. How we frame immigrants who are and other people who are not from here. And this is where I would like to use the framing from Bourdieu's notion of capital and transcultural capital. The research that uses this framework reframes the very notion of migrant or immigrant from a position of disadvantage to one of empowerment in relation to the challenges and opportunities of living as cross-cultural and transcultural humans. Transcultural capital that we possess often acts as a tool for navigating local integration challenges, for creating a sense of belonging to multiple places, and for adopting agency and capacity to build intercultural relations. From this perspective, transculturation deals with human interconnectivity and focuses on a selective weaving of cultural elements to create a new cultural belonging. In plain English, we figured out transnational practices and local incorporations are not mutually exclusive because we immigrants and migrants can remain simultaneously embedded in 2 or more social contexts. In plain English, we figured out how to belong in different places. My own process included participating in small talk when it's called for, or speaking indirectly. If you read my book, you know what I mean. I go into great lengths about that. Learning the local knowledge of the place where I live so I can participate in many different conversations and be on equal footing with local people. But I'm finding that no matter how much I know of possess of the local knowledge, I will still be not from here. And living with that and accepting that and owning my transcultural capital is also a form of belonging. And now, about belonging, I will read about Wonder Woman. Remember, I started with the movie. I'm going to end with the movie. Page 225. Oh, gosh, no, 221 is even better. Okay. So it's about a talk I'm doing at a conference. And so in this presentation, I continue to make jokes about the culture of small talk. You have to read the chapter about small talk. I explained that weather is not just a neutral filler for small talk, but in the context of the current culture of global climate change, it is the topic under discussion. And I conclude the talk with words to inspire teachers to help students view their language as their resource to expand their identities in places where they belong. I realize I'm also saying these words to myself. I return to my office from the conference and I discover the book, All Are Welcome by Alexander Penfold. We're part of a community. Our strength is our diversity, a shelter from adversity. All are welcome here. We will learn from each other. Special talents will uncover. There is a big world to discover. All are welcome here. We have a place. You have a place here. You have a space here. You are welcome here. I have a place here. I have a space here. I am welcome here. I have written my way into belonging. Yes, we have 5 minutes for questions.
This isn't a question, but I was just thinking when you asked yourself as a girl coming here, would these items bring enough dignity to stand for them? And I say, you had the dignity. You had everything you needed.
Thank you.
And
Thank
I
you.
can see why you would love those things, but I also think it was you and your courage and your resilience and your bravery to come to the United States so long ago. Do you dream in English or Ukrainian?
Do you mean like dreams at night, or what does that mean?
Dreams at night.
I dream of my homeland. I just see a space. That's my homeland, the river, the potato fields. I dream of the road that takes me home and takes me to my grandma's house.
Have you been back?
Many times. Thank you. Yes, and my children have been with me and my husband many times.
How is your family now?
Pretty good, considering what that means now in war. My cousin is fighting in the east. He came back wounded from Bakhmut and was being in the hospital, not severely, but enough to be out of service for, I don't know, a couple of months. And my dad is doing okay. They live in central Ukraine, so it's kind of relatively safe, but really nothing is. There was a rocket that hit a town 100 kilometers away, which I think is about 60 miles. So imagine a town 60 miles from here is what, Milwaukee? Yeah, that's close. So that can be just awful.
With this unprovoked war, after its conclusion, do you think that the Russian society can ever work an arrangement with the Ukrainian society to have a functioning relationship?
It's a 300 years of imperialism. Will probably take 300 years to repair the relationship. Not after what happened in Bucha and Mariupol and Bakhmut. Not tomorrow.
Have you been back since the war started?
So I tried, but this summer we made a compromise. My dad wanted to have a mini vacation, and my brother lives in Amsterdam, so we met there for 2 weeks. My dad took a bus from where he lives, and 48-hour bus ride, and made it to Amsterdam, and we had glorious 2 weeks together. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Are you a naturalized citizen, or are you planning on being?
I am. I became a citizen, and I think it's 2006 or 7. Yes. That was also an emotional process. There's a question here? No? Okay, Mike is coming. I'll take one more question because I do have a ride back to Milwaukee in the dark, the rain.
You mentioned several of the vestiges of Russia that have been addressed, like language and some others. As you look at Ukraine today, again, trying to say what's left of Russia that still needs to be removed to make Ukraine Ukraine.
So
culturally, etc. Is there a lot left? Jen?
the Soviet,
Just about there?
I think the Soviet system still has some, like I call it, leftover residue, right? It's, I think partly there is still corruption that's left over from the Soviet system. But at least they are overtly fighting it now. So I think that remnant of Soviet system is still being worked out. That's corruption. That's kind of how I would answer that question.
I read your book and I want to say I really appreciated.
Can't find you. Oh, here you are.
Yes, I really appreciated your Christian faith that you included
Thank
in
you.
the book.
Mhm.
Thank you for doing that.
Yes. Thank you for appreciating it. Okay, we'll take 3 more questions, I guess.
Got it right.
Do you know the name Christian Sokar?
What's
She's a lawyer. It was
in where?
She's Ukrainian.
In where?
She lives in Ukraine.
Okay.
She's Ukrainian. She was in the Ukrainian Senate, and she went to Loyola School of Law. And she's
Awesome.
fighting corruption
Awesome.
right now. I just read about her in my Jesuit magazine.
Did you read also how Zelensky fired like his top echelon of military leaders because they were all corrupt, and they said corruption is the same as betrayal? I'm glad she did.
Can you write the ISBN number? Can you write the ISBN number on the board?
Yeah. I by the way, I can't move because I'm connected to 2 mics that are laying on the table. And if I move, like the whole system crashes. Yes, so here's my SBN if you wouldn't mind writing. Yeah, thank you. One more question?
We also read your book, and I just want to say thank you for all the photographs.
Oh, yeah.
Somehow, seeing your grandma
Yeah.
and your mama
Mm-hmm.
in your home
Mm-hmm.
really made a difference.
Mhm.
I felt like I knew you through your descriptions and your photos. So thank you for the effort.
Yes. You're welcome. Thank you so much for this evening. This was a gift to me as well. Oh, yeah.
Are you selling your?
I am selling my books. Yep. They're $20.
Okay.
Who has the mic? There it is.